Are we facing the biggest F1 regulatory scandal in the last 10 years? How is it possible that the FIA publishes two contradictory documents on the same race maneuver? And above all, why is Hamilton sanctioned and Verstappen and Leclerc not? It all started on lap 14 of the 2025 Mexican Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton, driving his Ferrari SF25 in one of the most intense races of the season, was involved in a fierce duel against Max Verstappen. Both reached turn 4 after a complex first sector that had faced them with a millimeter fight of braking, limit lines, and aggressive defense. At that critical moment, Hamilton locks the right front tire. What seemed like an aggressive overtaking maneuver on the outside ended in a forced off-track. The car, at the limit of adhesion, could not turn or take the escape route marked by the yellow line, as required by the race director's protocol. That block was key. It was not a deliberate driving error. It was a direct consequence of the confrontation on the track, a natural reaction of the car to maximum braking pressure with little aerodynamic load due to the suction of nearby cars. Any track engineer with access to telemetry can confirm it. The sudden deceleration, the braking angle, and the weight distribution at that moment made it impossible to maintain the regulatory line. The FIA had all that data. And the most worrying thing is that the commissioners also knew it. Because 12 minutes after the incident, Document 36 was published with a blunt resolution, a 10-second penalty for Hamilton for leaving the track and obtaining a lasting advantage. In it, it was stated that, although the driver could not follow the prescribed route, he had gained an advantage when leaving the track, overtaking Verstappen and not returning position. There was no mention of any technical considerations, no reference to the physical limits of the car, nor to the traffic context, nor to brake locking. But then, the unthinkable happened. Barely 12 minutes later, the same FIA, the same commissioners, published Document 37. This new document contradicts the previous one line by line. Now the stewards claimed that Hamilton did not violate the race director's instructions, as the car was carrying too much speed to allow the driver to use the prescribed escape route. That is, they recognized that there was no real possibility of complying with the regulations due to technical reasons. Not only that, they accept that Hamilton did everything possible to avoid a collision, both with Verstappen and with George Russell, who was approaching from behind. In other words, they act as if the penalty should never have existed. Two documents, two realities. Both signed by the same race officials. Issued in less than a quarter of an hour. How is this explained? Was it human error? An internal communication problem? Or are we facing political manipulation of the results? Because Formula One, more than a sport, is also a geopolitical board in which each decision weighs tons. This act reveals something much deeper than a simple administrative inconsistency. It shows that the FIA is operating with a sanctions system that does not have clear review mechanisms, that does not ensure consistency, and that leaves what should be exact science to subjective interpretation. A technical regulation, by definition, must be governed by logic and engineering, not by emotions or external pressures. And when two official documents contradict each other in public, trust throughout the institution is eroded. This incident calls into question not only the outcome of the Mexican Grand Prix, but the entire championship. Because in a season where every tenth and every point can define a title, a poorly applied penalty can change history. And if this penalty is recognized as erroneous by the same entity that imposed it, who is responsible? Who makes up for lost time? Who restores competitive damage to Hamilton? This was the exact moment the scandal broke. Not when Hamilton blocked the brake. Not when he left the track. But when the FIA contradicted itself in front of the entire world. To understand why Hamilton's sanction has no real basis, we must stop looking at the event as a simple corner cut and start analyzing it from a technical, physical, and contextual point of view. Formula One, in its essence, is a sport of extreme precision, where each maneuver is determined by data, by dynamic conditions, by millimetric decisions made in fractions of a second. And this specific case, that of the incident in turn 4 of the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez, exemplifies it perfectly. Let's start with the essentials. Hamilton did not leave the track voluntarily or deliberately to gain an advantage. It was a forced reaction due to the context and the physical limitations of the car at that time. The telemetry shows a massive blockage of the right front tire, just as Hamilton attempted a maneuver on the outside on Verstappen. Under normal conditions, the driver would have attempted to take the curve following the race director's protocol, using the escape route marked by the yellow line. But that was not a viable option. It was not a matter of choice. It was a practical impossibility. The reason? At the speed of his car, and after the blockage, trying to turn towards that escape route meant risking a head-on collision against the barriers or even against Russell's car, which was approaching dangerously from behind. At that moment, Hamilton found himself in a position of absolute commitment. Braking harder was unfeasible. I had already passed the point of loss of grip. Turning more sharply would have caused a spin. Going straight was the only decision that prevented the accident. This is where the importance of aerodynamic data comes in. Ferrari's SF25, like any modern F1 car, relies heavily on clean airflow to maintain cornering power. But Hamilton was not riding in clean air. He was right next to Verstappen with Russell behind him. The car lost front load, it lost stability under braking. Any track engineer knows that this is the area of greatest vulnerability for these cars. The dirty air generated in these duels is enough to completely alter the behavior of the vehicle. But there is still more. Even if Hamilton had intended to give back the position, which he was not allowed to do because the penalty was imposed immediately and without opportunity for correction, the FIA never made clear whether it considered there was an objective advantage gained. What does a durable advantage consist of when the pilot loses speed, loses relative position, and is forced to rejoin outside the ideal trajectory? What is the exact criteria used? Because in this case, the same document that sanctions him admits that he could not follow the escape route, but penalizes him the same. That is, two mutually exclusive facts are recognized. 1, it couldn't turn. And 2, that he gained an advantage. How can you get an advantage if you don't have control of the car? It is a structural contradiction. If the pilot could not comply with the protocol for physical and technical reasons, then he cannot be guilty of disobeying it. You cannot penalize a maneuver when technical circumstances push you outside the control limits. This is where another critical point comes in, the lack of consistency of the sanction system. If a somewhat documented, visible, and measurable brake lockup is not considered sufficient mitigation, then what is? What does a pilot need to prove to justify that his maneuver was not deliberate? Because this goes beyond Hamilton. This affects every driver on the grid. If in a hand-to-hand battle with multiple cars and no room for maneuver, a driver cannot trust that the FIA will analyze the context before sanctioning, then the system is not reliable. It is based on erratic interpretations, not science. The FIA, furthermore, did not correct its error immediately. It issued 2 official documents with opposite conclusions. And that only makes things worse. If a court sentences you guilty and minutes later says that there was no crime, what value does that judgment have? How can an organization with the level of demand of Formula One operate with that degree of documentary inconsistency? That is why this case is so serious. This is not just a technical error. It is a structural flaw in the decision-making process. And in a championship where the margins between victory and defeat are milliseconds, a poorly reasoned penalty can destroy an entire season. It doesn't matter if you are a 7-time world champion or a debuting rookie. The regulations must protect equality, not fuel chaos. The root of the scandal is not only in Hamilton's penalty, but in what did not happen to the others. Because while the Briton was penalized 10 seconds for an unintentional maneuver, 2 other drivers, Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc, committed clearly voluntary and even more advantageous actions, and went completely unpunished. Verstappen's maneuver is especially illustrative. Upon reaching turn 1 in the middle of a chaotic exit with multiple cars in parallel, Max chose to launch himself on the inside without any possibility of taking the complete sequence of corners. I knew I wouldn't have grip, I knew I would cut through the grass and I would have an advantage. And that's exactly what he did. He didn't try to brake later, he didn't correct the angle. He simply accelerated, crossed the grass as if it were part of the route and rejoined the front of the group. It was a 100% strategic decision. No locks. Without loss of control. Without external conditions. The reaction from the environment was immediate. Former drivers, engineers, and specialized media denounced the double standard of the FIA. Martin Brundle's statements were devastating. Max didn't even make an attempt to take the curve. In any other category of motorsport that is a direct sanction, what we saw cannot go unnoticed. Jacques Villeneuve also took aim at inconsistencies in the regulations, suggesting that the rules were so poorly written that they allowed for these types of ambiguities that erode the integrity of the sport. Because if the system allows an identical action to be judged differently based on the name of the driver or the team he represents, then we are not talking about sporting justice. We are talking about institutional favoritism. The FIA, by issuing 2 contradictory documents on the same fact, has done something more serious than failing in its judgment. It has revealed that there is no robust internal system to ensure consistency in decision-making. It has shown that the interpretation of the rules can change in a matter of minutes, even under the pressure of the ongoing race. And it has become clear that, when it comes to high-profile drivers or politically influential teams, the criteria become elastic, accommodating, and opaque. The moment demands action. It is not enough to issue statements. The technical regulations must be reviewed, criteria unified, objective sanction parameters established, and above all, transparency guaranteed. Mistakes can be forgiven. Arbitrariness, no. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.